Yeah, I'm Helen Ford. I'm a nutritional therapist and I've been practicing for 25 years. So specializing in hormonal imbalance. So that's women's health, men's health, and diabetes is kind of, or pre-diabetes is a hormone related condition because insulin, as we'll talk about more shortly, is a hormone. And I did this talk 2 years ago, and it's so lovely when Eva and Kate asked me to come back to talk. So I'm glad it went down well, and say some of you may have already seen it. So it's a little bit different to last time. I've adapted it, but we're going to save questions till the end. So I prepared a few slides. So write down your questions, and then we will have a little open discussion towards the end. And apologies for my presentation skills in terms of the design of the slides. I do struggle on that side of things. So yes, we're talking about type 2 diabetes and how that kind of impacts you living with neurological conditions. And this is also, I know Eva said that some of you haven't had a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes, but you might be pre-diabetic. So in fact, this talk is so relevant because there's so much that can be done to really kind of, reduce that risk of it moving into type 2 diabetes. So just a little recap, and I'm sure a lot of you, if you're living with this or pre-diabetes, you have probably seen a dietitian or you've read around the subject. And I love this little diagram because what it tells us is that the easiest way to understand the type 2 diabetes is that it's where your insulin, which is a hormone that your pancreas produces, it's where it basically it's not being recognized, it's not being picked up by the cells properly. And this picture is so lovely because we're using the analogy of a lock and key. So the key is the insulin and the cell is the lock. And I love this picture. So on the left, you've got normal insulin function. The key or the insulin is moving the sugar from the bloodstream, putting it into the cell. And that's what happens day in, day out, minute by minute. Your blood sugar levels are very carefully regulated by this wonderful mechanism. But what happens with insulin resistance or pre-diabetes, type 2 diabetes, is that those cells become, and I like to use, it's not particularly scientific term, but they become deaf almost. They're not picking up insulin. So that key, as hard as it tries, can't get into the lock. So you have a lot of glucose sugar just floating around the bloodstream and it's not getting put into the cells. So that means your energy is not great because your cells aren't utilizing sugar efficiently. And then there are lots of symptoms, brain dysfunction, mood dysregulation, poor concentration. So many symptoms can manifest from this poor sugar uptake by the cells. So it's basically understanding that your brain and every cell, every muscle runs on glucose as energy. So when anything that's not quite normal means that there's going to be symptoms associated, and it can really affect, if you're trying to manage your nutrition and eat well, it can actually make you feel kind of quite fatigued, quite forgetful even, and then that can have a knock-on effect on the food choices that you make, and the sort of, oh, I'm too tired to eat, so you end up reaching for something that might not be as nutritionally balanced. I'd like to say, put your hand up if you have any quick interjection, but maybe that's better to stay at the end, actually, the questions. Sorry, Eva, don't want to complicate. We'll keep the questions to the end. So this is a lovely little picture which really sort of sums up for me. You can see what's happening with blood sugar. So this optimal blood sugar zone is the yellowy orange color, and then a balanced diet where insulin is being produced and picked up efficiently. You're going to have some fluctuations. Of course, you're not going to have stable sugar all day. But then when we're sort of eating too much sugar, too much refined carbohydrates. So remember, it's not just sugar that increases our blood sugar. It is things like white bread, white rice, lots of potatoes. That's what also gives us these sort of highs, lows, highs, lows. And this can really bring about craving. So if any of you are sort of having that mid-afternoon classic sort of, 3 o'clock slump where you go, oh, a cup of tea and a biscuit would be brilliant. That's because your blood sugar's dropped. And so we're trying to, with, simple, easy modifications to your diet, just try and stop those real kind of, highs and lows, like this sort of roller coaster. Because every time the blood sugar goes high, I'm pointing, I'm not sure you can see, on the red, every time it goes high, that's when your pancreas produces insulin. And so the more highs and lows you have, the more insulin you're producing. And so that's when, like I say, the cells in the end just go, oh, I can't take any more sugar. I can't, I can't speak to the insulin any longer because I've had so much produced. So that's why type 2 diabetes is more associated with age, rather than something like type 1 diabetes, where it's often something that you're born with or happens, early on in life. And that's a very different scenario. That's where the pancreas doesn't produce any insulin, whereas type 2, which is we're talking about today, it's very much, it's there. It's just that the cells aren't utilizing it properly. And so we want to really, move away from this high, low all day. And it's amazing, these subtle changes when we look at the diet together can make such a difference to, these cravings. And you might go, oh, do you know what? I haven't craved sugar today. You might fancy something sweet, but it's a real difference to sort of, right, I need some sugar because my blood sugar is so low. Or it might be, oh yes, fancy a bit of chocolate, because I've got a friend coming round, or a little biscuit, but there's not that absolute I need sugar. And that's the difference. And it's a very subtle change, but very noticeable. So, like I say, these blood sugar fluctuations, just things how it might affect you in real terms. If your blood sugar's low, that affects your brain. So you might just have these sort of, poor concentration, memory lapses where you forget to eat. So then your blood sugar is even lower. If you have any difficulties, sort of, with swallowing, stopping you from, you might find that your food choices are a little bit limited. So I've got some ideas for you later on. Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, if you haven't got the energy to cook, or the mobility is compromised, you've got less sort of motivation to eat well because you're so tired. And the quickest thing to bring your energy back up and sugar back up is something possibly sweeter, more sort of more convenience based. And yeah, I mean, eating smaller meals, sort of quick foods, they can be nutritious, but often they're less so. So it could be grabbing a biscuit because you're so tired that, that's the easiest thing to do when you're feeling under par and not wanting to cook. But, it's all about, I always say, being kind to yourself, making small changes. Sugar's not totally banned, and I'm really relaxed as a sort of practitioner myself because I've been doing this for so long. And I know that if you put really sort of unsustainable uh, dietary plans in place, it can actually be really stressful. And then stress can actually have a negative effect on blood sugar as well. So it's just being kind, looking at patterns that maybe you feel, oh yes, I do have that 3 o'clock chocolate hobnob and a cup of tea. What can I do to change it? Let's look at what else we can do to sort of reduce those sort of needs. Interesting fact. It's nice to have these sort of facts about our brain. So it weighs about 3 pounds, and it's actually over half of it is fat. And then the remaining is combined water, protein, carbohydrate, and salt. So that's telling us that, so carbohydrates are sugar. But that's telling us, you know, how important fat is for our brain. And I think for years and years and years, we've had it drummed into us that we don't want to eat fat. We want low fat, you know, particularly if any of you are sort of late 40s, 50s, where you grew up in kind of Rosemary Conley days, Slimming World days. You know, we've had a lot of anti-fat sort of drilled into us. But without fat, your brain can't function properly. And the cells, so the kind of the lock that takes in the insulin can't do that properly because those locks are made up of fat. So fat is really important. And I'll go through some types of fats that you can include more readily. Um, just a nice kind of summary page here. You might want to take a photo of this. It's a nice one just to have it as a reference, or I'm happy to share my slides with Eva at the end. Eat regularly. So do not skip meals. There's so much talk about fasting, even for diabetes, and I'm not a fan clinically and personally. So the idea, very without being too complex about the science, but when you don't eat, your blood sugar is naturally low. But because your brain and your cells and all your muscles need sugar to function, to you know, to move, to eat, to read, you know, to just to breathe, you've got to think logically. So if I'm not eating, let's say I'm fasting for 16 hours, you know, what am I running on? What's kind of fueling me? What's keeping me alive? And it's your adrenal glands. So you've got these wonderful glands called adrenal glands. They are our fight or flight, you know. So if there were to be a tiger, you would either fight or flee. So that's what they are there to do. But they can also ramp up their activity when blood sugar dips. So our bodies are very clever, and sometimes they're a little bit too clever because we then just take it for granted. We go, oh, actually, yeah, you know, I can go a long time without food. I might feel a bit off, but you know, in the end, I kind of feel a bit better again. But you don't want to be living on this kind of adrenaline cycle because, you know, that means you're just in this hyper fight or flight. It can affect your breathing. It can affect how anxious you feel, how stressed you feel, you know, more muscle aches and pains. So really paying attention to trying to have something within, you know, the first couple of hours of waking, little snack, lunch, snack, dinner, and that will make so much more sense in terms of sustained energy. Uh, Drinking often, I mean, water, fluids, herbal teas, use it, you know, have a sort of something that's very accessible for you. Sometimes, you know, having a straw makes it easier to drink, just for lots of reasons. If you've got any swallowing difficulties, sometimes it just makes it a bit more novel if you're just struggling to get, you know, the amount of fluids in. But keep your fluids in. Remember, the brain is made up of water as well. And yeah, soft food, so smoothies, soups, you know, blended things. You can make these really easily, very sort of, you know, economically as well, with, you know, dried pulses or tin pulses. So there's so much choice now. You can make these wonderful kind of meal soups, put everything into one dinner and make it into something that's very easy to get down. Um, and very, very passionate about protein because so if we go back a step and we think we've got these they're called macronutrients. So you've got your carbohydrates, you've got your fat, and you've got your protein. So carbohydrates are your primary fuel, and that's what converts into sugar. So we need them to survive. But if we're just eating them and not understanding, you know, how they affect our blood sugar and our insulin, you can end up with this roller coaster. So the rule of thumb is every time you have, so carbohydrate could be your bowl of porridge in the morning, you know, rice, jacket potato, mashed potato. On their own, they are converted to sugar quite quickly. remembering that things like oats are converted slower because they're more fibrous. But something like, white potato, bowl of white rice or white pasta, it's converting quite quickly into sugar. So you end up high, you produce insulin, gets it into the cell. If it doesn't, it just basically gets converted into fat. So by putting in protein, what this does, it slows down the conversion of the carbohydrate into sugar. So it's such a simple sort of rule to live by. So if you were to have porridge, pop in a spoonful of peanut butter. If you were to have a piece of toast, uh, don't just have it on its own in the morning, have it with an egg. So, protein and carb. So meat, fish, eggs, beans, pulses, natural yogurt. These are all lovely protein sources, and they really do help to make you feel fuller as well. So more satisfied after you've eaten. If you feel more satisfied, you're less likely to want that pick me up in the afternoon. Colour, I'm a massive fan of colour. I'm always going by, eat the rainbow. My children the other day was saying, well, eat the rainbow, aren't Skittles included in that because they're colourful? I said, no, not really. So yeah, colour is really something that makes you feel happy. I mean, I love looking at a plate with colour. And it can be this time of the year, frozen, frozen veg, frozen berries. That's much more cost effective and there's much less waste. But I think it just makes it's more nutritious having colour, but it also makes you feel a lot better by having colour on your plate. And this is a really good one. It sounds quite basic, but if you are someone that's forgetting to eat, um, and you're struggling with your blood sugars, just set a reminder, alarm on your phone, a sticky note somewhere that you can see. Uh, and then you soon get into that rhythm of eating. But yeah, it seems funny. I mean, I've got people that I see in clinic who will go all day without eating, or they'll go all day without drinking, and they just get so involved in what they're doing, they forget. But yeah, little reminders, subtle things to get you into those good habits. Now fruit juice, I'm not a massive fan of. Fruit juice is just the juice basically. So think about having a fresh apple. A fresh apple is fibrous. It's got the skin, which is fiber, and you eat the whole fruit. You sort of either it's a fresh apple, or you might have it stewed if you're struggling to eat something that's quite crunchy. But you get the fiber and everything's in there. And so what that means is fiber slows down the hit of sugar onto the bloodstream. Now, if you juice that, I don't know whether it's hard to sort of picture it sometimes if you buy a carton from the shop because you haven't seen the stages. But if I've ever juiced an apple at home, I've only got a NutriBullet. I sort of whiz it all up. You get all this sort of lovely foamy bit at the top and kind of roughage, and then you've got the liquid that separates, and that's so interesting because you are literally just getting the sugar from a juice. So a few tips: either try not to have fruit juice. If you are really finding it hard to drink water, just as it is, then you can dilute your fruit juice. So yeah, I would that's a nice little tip. So you can still have the pleasure and the taste, but just dilute it. And then limiting caffeine. So interestingly, and some people don't know this link, caffeine has the same effect on blood sugar as sugar. So again, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, oh, feel a bit tired, losing concentration. Right, let's have a coffee, let's have a cup of tea. And what it does, it increases adrenaline. So makes you feel anxious, jittery, quite alert, quite wired. it converts your stored sugar from your liver back into sugar, and then you think, oh, okay, feel okay again. But that can really affect you in terms of your sleep, and if you are feeling quite sort of anxious and emotionally dysregulated, having too much caffeine isn't good. Now, I love a cup of coffee, but it's within those sort of realms of eating well, because too much caffeine is not going to be good for the blood sugars. A few nice things that we can eat. Beetroot, amazing. Gosh, vacuum packed beetroot doesn't need to be fresh. You can get sort of frozen beet, all sorts of ways of getting beetroot, but the colour is beautiful, full of antioxidants, amazing for sort of looking at research with things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It sort of really helps to improve blood flow to the brain, so really open up those vessels. Absolutely firm favourite of mine. It's in season at the moment as well. Pumpkin seeds, brilliant. You can get these from so many places now, buy them in bulk, and they're just brilliant, full of zinc, full of fat, B vitamins, which are all really important for healthy blood sugar, healthy brain function. If sort of swallowing's tricky and worried about, maybe choking on the small seeds, they can be, put into if you've got like a NutriBullet or something similar, you can actually whiz them up, make them into a powder, and then pop them onto your porridge or put them into yogurt. But they are absolutely brilliant. And then olive oil. So going back to the whole fat situation, fat is good. Um, this is better than using something like a sunflower oil if you are cooking, or using it in any other culinary way. Olive oil, the research on Mediterranean diets and diabetes, heart disease, some cancers, incredible. So just think your cells are made of fat and your brain is made of fat. So lots of lovely olive oil. And again, very easy to get hold of now. Walnuts, I love this one. So they look like a brain, don't they? And yeah, they are so good for the brain. So they're one of the only nuts that actually contains omega-3 fat. So you've got two what we call essential fats. So they're essential because we can't make them in the body. We have to get them from diet and or supplements. So we've got 6 that comes from most nuts and seeds. We've got 3 that comes from mostly fish, but excuse me, also walnuts and flaxseed, chia seed. So these ones are particularly good for diabetes because they are within that lock that gets the insulin in. So lots of lovely walnuts. Again, if you're struggling to eat them, they can just be blitzed up, made into a nice powder, stirred into soups or, smoothies, something like that. Eggs are brilliant, really good for memory. So some interesting research coming out with vegan diets and the lack of choline, which is what is found in eggs, and poorer concentration memory. So if you are able to eat eggs, there are lots of ways that they can be incorporated, and they're really cost effective as well. And then fish, like I say, pardon the pun, no brainer. The brain is 60% fat. These are so underrated. Tinned fish for me, I always prefer because it's easy, it doesn't smell, and it's just so, yeah, it's so inexpensive and it's just so nutritious. So sardines, mackerel, smoked mackerel is also really good. And yeah, just helps with the sort of the communication between the cell and the insulin. It helps with reducing inflammation, so brain health, any, joint aches and pains you might be experiencing, absolutely integral to have this fat. Green leafy veg, so lovely, more colour, so good for cognitive function. Berries, I said earlier, frozen berries are brilliant. So generally, rule of thumb is the brighter the colour, the more pigment, whether it's black, red, blue, green, that's where the nutrition comes in from. And you can even get, frozen spinach is brilliant. So you can get the bags where they come in little sort of balls, almost frozen. And then if you were making a soup or a stew, you can pop one in, and it, just again, so much less waste. The amount of times I've bought a bag of spinach and then it's gone a bit slimy and you've had to throw it away. So frozen, I'm a massive fan of, and often more nutritious because it's been frozen at source. So big fan of frozen fruit and veg. Cocoa or cacao. I mean, it's just good. So you can, and especially if you want something sweet, this is a nice way of making a hot drink with cocoa. Lots of sort of flavonoids, so antioxidants, which really help with neuroprotective benefits. Plus, it's gives you something nice if you're wanting that sort of slight change to just having a herbal tea or trying not to have as much tea and coffee. And then things to reduce, probably quite obvious, sugar, alcohol, and processed foods. So it's all about reduction for me. It's not about a totally abstaining, because it's not practical. And like I said earlier, it can be quite stress inducing. So, we're all human beings. We're all, we're not programmed to be machines where we just eat, certain foods. And, it's about enjoyment and pleasure from what the food gives us rather than just nutrition all the time. But we know that sugar spikes our blood sugar. It increases more insulin production, which again, it's tiring out that poor pancreas. Your pancreas is getting tired of just producing more and more insulin to counteract this high sugar consumption. So yeah, so making better food choices, and being clever. So if you were to have some chocolate, for example, um, maybe try and make a dark chocolate choice rather than the milk chocolate, or if possible, have a few nuts. So then you've got the balancing out the fat, the protein from the nut with the sugar from the chocolate. Alcohol, I mean, there's been some interesting studies around red wine, in terms of some benefits for brain health, but it's that being moderate and realizing that it is just a neat source of sugar that's going to spike that high, low. And then processed food. So there's a huge push at the moment around, avoiding UPFs, ultra processed foods. And I'm so much on board with this, but again, we don't need to be so strict about it that we never have a processed food, because that's not normal. I always use that sort of example of mayonnaise. It's one of the most processed foods. I do buy it, but I have it so rarely that I don't worry about it, and it's those things. If you're having it every day, it's not so good. If you're having it once in a while, it's fine. But yeah, just trying to be aware of the more ingredients that are in something, the more processed it is. So if you were buying a soup because that was easier for you, then great. And there's some really good soups out there now. Have a look at the ingredients. If you've got 20 ingredients in a tomato soup, not good. If you've got, 3 or 4, it looks fine. So you just need to sort of pick and choose. But yeah, we're trying to reduce our consumption of processed foods because we know there's a direct correlation with poor health, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, lots of degenerative diseases are you can link with a high consumption of processed foods. So this is a nice one for you. So, when you are feeling tired or you're feeling, not able to get out so much and you're just feeling things are getting a bit too much, just do things that are easy for yourself. So there are lots of bags now where you can get these frozen, keep going back to frozen, don't I? But it's like a Frito mix. So it's your onions, carrots, celery, onions, carrots, celery. There's something else in there, I think, and it's like a soup base or a stew base. So then all the chopping's done, and literally put it into the pan and then use it. Get help, get someone to help you prepare meals, and maybe do some batch cooking or get someone to help you with that. And one pot meals, I'm such a fan of this. I mean, I've got 2 children, I work, and I love those like one pot, your pasta, your chicken, tin of tomatoes, peppers, throw it all in, stick it in the oven, and then you've got a one beautiful meal, less washing up, and everything's in one. And if you make enough, you can then use it for the next day, put some in the freezer. And yeah, don't be confused by recipes either. You can make things up pretty easily if you've got a few things, or go online, but you don't need to follow really fancy recipes to get a good nutritious food. It's just sort of putting a few bits together. And if you're not eating meat, then lots of pulses. even if you are eating meat, pulses are so good because they spread the cost of the meal. You get more, you can sort of have your meat flavor, but you also get your pulses as well. So that's a nice sort of tip for you. And just keeping that energy up, and stopping that slump. So eating regularly, getting plenty of rest during the day as well. And just, if you're finding that any of these things are overwhelming, or you're losing weight, or you're struggling, then hopefully there'll be someone that can help you to sort of navigate that, dietitian or healthcare provider that can help you with that. Yeah, so this is lovely. I love this little picture. So small steps. So if today feels quite overwhelming and you're, thinking, gosh, I'm going to have to rethink my whole eating plan. It doesn't have to be. It can be one small change, and that could be, so I'm going to swap my biscuit for, a banana in the afternoon, or, maybe twice a week, you'll have biscuits rather than 7 days a week, whatever that thing is. Um, but just feeling the benefit it can make, and it can be so wonderful to feel that difference between, the kind of the sudden I need food now, hunger, sugar cravings, to really balance more energy, less anxiety. And if any of you are, because diabetes type 2 doesn't always manifest with sort of increased weight, but it can do. So these sorts of changes also will helpfully lower fat, weight, and then have a positive knock-on effect on everything else. And hopefully we know within the community that you've got here, that you've got people that you can share ideas and share recipes and get really involved and support each other. Almost done with the slides. Hope it's not, I'm just checking my timing. So yeah, I think we've talked about swallowing, and any difficulties with sort of dexterity. Yeah, purees. So get yourself a inexpensive blender. I mean, I say NutriBullet because mine's about 6, 7 years old, but there's so many types now. But then you can blend things up, have them as soups, stews, things that you can, that are easy for you. And yeah, just doing things within your kind of own capabilities. So if you are okay with swallowing and chewing, obviously you'll choose different foods to those that are maybe struggling with that aspect. But the nice thing about purees is you can freeze, and you can do ice cube portions, or you can do bigger portions. So there's lots of nice things you can do with that. I think I've just, yeah, I've talked about that. So maybe some people, you've got some sort of help there that can help you, maybe with some meal planning, that will take your personal considerations, individual considerations into account. Um, yeah, so mobility, if you're unable to get out, or you're feeling too weak to cook, or you're finding shopping, cooking harder, then there are some decent ready-made meals. They often come at slightly more expensive. It's not, no, it's not as cost effective, and some of them are more processed, but there are options. I'm not too up on those because I tend not to buy them, but I bet there are people that sort of use things that, or where you get these meal kits and they're sort of partly done, and you just need to sort of do a little bit of preparation. But just being mindful of, if you are in that situation where you're feeling it hard to cook physically, and then you think, oh well, I'll miss the meal, that's then going to, spike that sort of adrenaline, blood sugar cycle again. So it's doing what you can to really get involved with that. Yeah, and these are things that you might find useful. So I'm sure you've got all of these things that if you are struggling with chopping, either pre-chopped, or using things that can help you. I don't know about the sort of meal delivery. I expect that is quite expensive, so it might just be that you're able to get someone to help you to prepare those meals at a much more reasonable, cost effective. So finally, in summary, I think we've discussed this and can understand the importance of our brain, and how this basically fits into the blood sugar diabetes cycle, because everything is so interrelated in the body. And I think sometimes we think about diabetes as, or oh, it's just to do with blood sugar. Well, it is, but then that has an effect on stress, the brain, the muscles, the joints, the immune system, so on and so forth. So it's just making as healthy food choices as you can, being kind to yourself. But really, the conclusion is less sugar, less processed foods, more protein and more plants. And if any of you are on social media, a lot of really good inspiration for getting more fiber, getting more plants is the Zoe. So it's they do the sort of the constant glucose monitoring kits, which is interesting. But they've got some lovely recipes on there where lots of them are just so easy, and using lots of pulses and using lots of different plants, and getting as much colour as you can into your diet. I hope that's been helpful. Hope you have all enjoyed that talk, and I'm ready and waiting for any questions you've got. Thank you for listening.